Hi, Connie.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm awesome.
Good. Oh, trying to get everything set up here.
Trying to get myself organized as well.
We got too many things to juggle here. Doesn't look like Carlos isn't going to join us tonight.
He's the one from Wichita Falls, is that right? Always
Yes.
get names mixed up, the face.
Yep. Okay. Get my other pages here. Are you going to be in the drive-through?
I am. I plan to serve in the prayer tent, but there's actually more people than usual that signed up to serve
Oh,
in the
yeah.
prayer tent, which is good. Hi, Lucas. And so I don't know if they need me somewhere else, I'll serve somewhere else. But
Yeah. Yeah. This year I'm in the Isaiah scene, but now there's 3 of us instead
Hey
of
guys,
Hey, Lucas.
hi, Lucas.
how are you? Thank you.
How are you doing?
Good. I'm still missing to turn some homeworks class like lesson 5 and 6. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'll make sure to do it. I turned like the 2 through 4, but I'm
Yeah.
still behind. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're not the only one. Connie's the only one that gets everything in early.
Good job. Maybe it's
Well,
a guy thing. Maybe it's a guy thing.
He's a good student.
I just cannot. I'm always so afraid that I'm going to forget to do something,
Right.
or
Yeah.
something will come up and then I won't be able to get it done. And so I
Makes sense.
always work
Just
ahead.
get it done.
I can't do it when I start feeling the pressure.
Right.
Yeah.
When I was your age, it didn't bother me.
Oh, come on.
Just pile more stuff on and it wouldn't matter. But now it's like I can't.
I'm not that young anymore, so trust me. I used to be. We all.
Oh, I thought someone was joining us.
We were just talking, Lucas, about our church that does a
Yeah.
drive-through, Christmas drive-through. Does your church
Oh.
do something kind of unique or special to
I
attract
mean,
the community?
like, yeah, we did like what you call a Christmas tree walk, where they put like the Christmas tree and tell like the story of Christmas. It's beautiful. Like they did like last Saturday and Sunday. Actually, it was Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and the community like show us up and come so we can talk about like Christmas story, like the real one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we did that. That was super cool.
My middle school class, they asked me, hi, Robert. They asked me,
Hello there.
Yeah.
We were studying for a test and it talked about the incarnation of Christ and
Right.
well, what Christian holiday do we celebrate? And they're like, Christmas. And then one of them said, well,
Yeah.
so what about all the people who don't believe in Christ? So they really aren't celebrating. They don't celebrate Christmas. I'm like, well, yes, they do, but it's just the American, it's like the world's version of Christmas, not the reason why we do. Well, then they can't be so, and it went into this. It's like, okay, just right. Yeah, they ask them deep questions sometimes.
I can't imagine.
No. Well, welcome. I guess this is going to be us for tonight. Carlos, I guess there was some sickness and different things in their house, and so he's going to probably watch the recording of this session after we're done. I'm haven't uploaded all the other sessions before, but no one had missed yet. So there wasn't, unless, you have extra time and you just want to watch the lesson again. I think most people don't have time to go through this more than once. So welcome. We're moving on into lessons 7 and 8 tonight, and going on still in the unit on philosophical ethics. And basically, this is ethics that doesn't necessarily require the belief in God, or a source of morality that's just beyond human nature and natural ability and understanding. So we get a kind of a continuation of that with lesson 7 and lesson 8. Other philosophers that tried to explain moral realities without having to invoke God. And so we're kind of bouncing around here. We're talking about Immanuel Kant tonight, but then following that, in talking about virtue ethics, we go back to Aristotle. So we're kind of bouncing around here. But so looking at lesson 7, we're talking about Kantianism, and that's referring to Immanuel Kant, who's probably the most important philosopher of the modern period. He made contributions to the field of philosophy and metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. His philosophy affects all philosophy in the West. And this is clearly evident in the philosophies of Soren Kierkegaard, Friedrich Hegel, and Karl Marx, as well as many other philosophical schools in the 20th century. And so under our learner objectives, by the end of this lesson, participants should define the principles of Kantianism, apply the principles of Kantianism, and understand the limitations of Kantianism. And so kind of as let me pause and let's ask for God to help us do this. I think we all need help with this.
I needed help with the whole class, brother. Some of the terminology and anyway,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Got to keep a dictionary out when you're reading some of this stuff. All right. God, Lord, we need you. We ask that you'll guide us and help us to understand what we need to from this, and then be able to prepare us for the next units that we're covering, and just help us to see where we need to learn in this time, and just pray you'll guide our time together, give us wisdom, and give me strength to facilitate this. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, so just kind of throwing out an issue, a scenario, before we get into the main part of the lesson. So talking about capital punishment, we see it as a significant moral dilemma in our time. Some Christians line up in favor of capital punishment, while some firmly seek to stop all such practices. And I think there is reason for that in terms of the many people that have been falsely accused that have been, shown not guilty by virtue of, DNA and things like that. And so, there's different states, of course, that paused their capital punishment because it was proven that there were many that were falsely imprisoned and put on death row and things like that, to make sure the system, because the last thing you want is a system that's continually, you know, executing people that are innocent. That's the last thing we want to see happen. So at the core of this debate is whether punishment can punishment rehabilitate, or whether it can only give a person what is deserved. Those who underscore rehabilitation argue that killing another person is really a hopeless act and it denies all possibility of rehabilitation. Those who support capital punishment argue that it might serve as a deterrent for those who contemplate capital crimes. Those who refuse to accept capital punishment argue that killing a killer is not less brutal than the original offense. So how do you respond to these arguments? Can punishment rehabilitate? How do you defend your conclusion? You want to jump in on this?
I will.
Go ahead.
I remember years ago, this conversation came up, and I was in a different place than I am now. However, I still think part of what I'm about to say is true. I don't believe that capital punishment provides rehabilitation. That being said, back in the dark ages, you know, when they used to hang thieves and murderers in the court square, much to society's chagrin today, parents actually took their children to witness those executions, not out of anything sick or morbid, but as an opportunity to reinforce the fact that consequences have actions. So as a deterrent, I still think execution is a horrible thing, but that being said, not to negate it by saying, but I think there is a deterrence that children today and even adults today don't realize the consequences of their actions. They don't realize the immediate consequences or the ripple effects of them. So, you know, our judicial system in this country, even though it's flawed, it's a system that we have. You know, I think earlier in this class, we might have talked about or maybe it was another class, we talked about the American kid that got caned in Singapore for defacing public property. That was their laws. Now, they didn't execute the kid, but they didn't treat him any differently than they would have one of their own, I guess is my point. So, you know, I think I do not believe that capital punishment stands any possibility of rehabilitation. And with our justice system, somebody convicted of capital murder, for example, is in the prison system for sometimes decades while the appeal process is worked through. Does that individual stand an opportunity of being rehabilitated? Yeah, during that time, I believe they do. So I'm really torn about it, but I do believe that it stands more on the side of deterrence than it does rehabilitation.
Yeah. Anyone else? Any thoughts?
Yeah, we don't want to actually say anything with this one.
I mean, just for me, like, to understand, this is a term that I'm not using to, but capital punishment, it's the when you like have the right to kill the person, or for something
that's like the ultimate judgment is execution.
Is execution,
for a crime, you know.
Okay.
And
Right.
yeah, so that's something, well, it's not just in America, there's many other countries that
Yeah.
have that, you know. Um,
Right.
you know, does it, you know, I mean, there can be questions, does it work? Does it, you know, what is it?
Yeah.
You know, what is the greater good here? Things like that.
So we don't have this thing in Texas.
Don't have what? Yeah, we do.
This, I mean, oh, we do. Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's by states, or it's by
Yeah.
the state to decide, or it's just a federal thing.
Yeah, no, some states don't have capital punishment.
Right. Okay.
Texas does.
Oh, Texas does.
So,
Okay.
yeah, so when there's not that as an option, then the other option is life, like life in prison,
Yeah. Okay.
you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yeah. Connie, you good?
Yeah, when you think about other countries that have really, really strict laws and strict legal consequences of crime, it seems that the crimes are reduced, that their crime rate is lower. At least that's what's reported.
Yeah.
But from a capital punishment standpoint, as a Christian, I would hope that there's an opportunity for everybody to be rehabilitated from a faith perspective. And so if you kill them, they wouldn't have that chance. But to Robert's point, they're usually in the legal system a long time before it ever gets to that point of execution.
Right. Right.
But I also this is kind of a dark side of my finance background, is somebody has committed a horrible crime and they are a danger to anybody else on earth, then it's costing the taxpayers money to keep them in the prisons. And if they're that cruel and demented, then they're also creating that same environment in the prison system wherever they are. Sometimes they actually have to be isolated because of it. So I don't know, I'm really torn about it, but I mean, we could try to justify it because at least Old Testament people were told that, and you break the Sabbath, consequence, death. Sleep with the wrong person, consequence, death. So although if you look at Old Testament, God had zero tolerance for sins against other people, his own people. I'm torn. I'm glad I'm not in a decision-making position to decide that for anybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so let's see. Well, so just from Kant's point of view, and we'll hear more about that in a minute. He would understand punishment to be he would not understand punishment to be capable of rehabilitation. The primary reason for this conclusion is that this would link one's action to a consequence, and which is we talked about the telos. So the end or the action has a consequence, and do we look at the consequence or do we just look at the action itself? So Kant determines morality on the basis of universal principles. This means capital punishment is either moral or immoral based on a logic disconnected from consequences. So it's either right or wrong based on its right or wrongness itself, not on whatever consequences it might have. And so he says he would say if it is never justified for government to take the life of someone, then capital punishment is immoral. If it is justified for a government to respect human life by always seeking to protect it, then capital punishment can be moral. And as Connie pointed out, Scripture does not prohibit capital punishment, nor does it prohibit punishment. In both cases, the justification appears more toward deontological than teleological. It's right or wrong based on what's inherent in the action, not the good or bad of the consequences from it. Now, and as Connie pointed out, regarding the general rehabilitation question, the Christian faith teaches the possibility of transformation by the grace of God. It does teach that punishment can be justified, but not on the basis of its consequence, whether it affects the greater good of everyone involved. So going on with our into the main part of your notes, looking at resource 7.1, looking at Kantianism, we see that ethics, like physics, is partly empirical and partly deductive. And empirical means based on, concerned with, or verifiable by observation or experience, rather than theory or pure logic. And deductive means characterized by or based on the inference of particular instances from a general law. And so ethics, according to Kant, must first and most importantly be based on pure reason without recourse to experience. And he would say also, so that, there we'll come to these people later, but so it's not, for him, it's not, these things are not based on divine command, that it's determined by a deity or determined by God, and it's not by natural rights or natural law, that the idea that morality comes from us because we're made by God, who put this in us, that he sees that that he doesn't like to pair religion and morality. That he believes, he wants to keep it separated, keep it apart. And so he argues, in order to determine what's right, you have to use reason and a sense of consideration for other people. So that he wants morality to be universal no matter what your religion is. Like he thinks it should be a universal thing, not limited by religion. Because he felt that if we look to religion for our morality, we're not all going to get to the same answer if you do it just based on religious. But he thought morality was a constant in an almost mathematical sense. That 2 + 2 = 4, whether you're a Christian, Buddhist, or atheist. And for Kant, the same went for moral truths. So let's see. So the ground, he said, must be found in pure reason. He said he understands that everything works according to laws. Since only human beings have the capacity to operate according to reason, they are alone able to will rationally. When the reason latches on to specific principles, these become imperatives or duties. These imperatives are expressed as ought or shall. There are two types of imperatives, either categorical or hypothetical. And that this is the basic starting place for Kantian ethics. So let me switch here real quick. Oops. Gotta get to the right window. Okay, so he said, so he believed that most of the time, whether or not we ought to do something isn't really a moral choice. Instead, it's contingent on our desires. Like if you desire to get money, then you ought to get a job. If you desire to get an A in class, then you ought to study. So that's, you know, the action and the consequence. If, then, you know. So that makes this like teleological kind of argument. Kant called these if-then statements hypothetical imperatives. They're commands you should follow if you want something. But hypothetical imperatives are about prudence rather than morality. This is what you, if you want this goal, if you want this result, this is what you should do. So if you don't want money, you can always choose not to work. And if you don't care about getting a good grade, studying becomes optional. But Kant viewed morality not in terms of hypothetical imperatives. These are not so-called moral dilemmas or issues. You know, those things are optional. But he talked about categorical imperatives. And these are commands you must follow regardless of your desires, because moral obligations are derived from pure reason. And he said it doesn't matter whether you want to be moral or not, the moral law is binding on all of us. And he said you don't need religion to determine what law is, because what's right or wrong is totally knowable just by using your intellect. So how do you figure out what's moral? He said the categorical imperative can be understood in terms of various formulations. Basically, different ways of phrasing or looking at the same essential idea. And he came up with several formulations of the categorical imperative. And the first, there's four, but the first one is often known as the universality of a principle. And he said the, you know, is it universalizability principle. He said, only act according to that maxim, which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law without contradiction. So the maxim is a rule or principle of action. And the universal law is something that must always be done in similar situations. So he's saying, before I act, I should ask myself, what's the maxim of my action? In other words, what's the general rule that stands behind the particular action I'm considering? And here's an example. He said, let's say you forgot your wallet in your dorm this morning, or you're at your home. You don't have time to go between between home and work, and you're really hungry. And you know, say you're you're on a break and you notice there's a snack kiosk in the mall, and the person manning it is engrossed in conversation, and you could easily snag a banana and be on your way. You could easily, is it okay morally for you to do this? So the particular action you're considering, taking a banana from a merchant without paying for it, is stealing. And if you approve the maximum of stealing, which is what you're doing, whether you admit it or not, then what you're actually doing is universalizing that action. You're saying that everyone should always steal. If you should be able to do it, then everyone should be able to do it. But this leads to a contradiction. And he believes that moral actions cannot bring about contradictions. The contradiction here is that no one should say that everyone should steal all the time. Because if everyone should always steal, then you should steal the banana. And then I should steal it back from you. And then you should steal it back from me. And it would never end, and no one would ever get to eat any bananas. Therefore, stealing is not universalizable. And so what he's saying here, it's not fair to make exceptions for yourself. You don't really think stealing is okay, and by imagining what it would be like to universalize it, that becomes clear. If it's okay for you, then it's okay for everyone, and then that just leads, to a total disaster. So his view that moral rules apply to everyone equally sounds nice and fair, but it can sometimes lead to some pretty counterintuitive results. So to see how this formulation can go awry, let's say one morning, Elvira and Tony are having breakfast. Then a stranger comes to the door and asks where Tony is so he can kill him. Obviously, Elvira's impulse is to lie and say that Tony isn't around right now in order to protect him from this would-be murderer. But Kant says that she cannot lie, not ever, not even to save Tony's life. Here's his reasoning. Suppose she's at the front door talking to the stranger. At the time, she thinks Tony's in the kitchen where she left him. But it turns out he was curious about the caller, so he followed her into the living room and heard the stranger make these threats. Fearing for his life, Tony slipped out the back door. Meanwhile, Elvira, in her desire to save him, tells the stranger that Tony isn't there, even though she thinks he is. Based on her lie, the stranger leaves and runs into Tony as he rounds the corner heading away from the house and kills him. Had she told the truth, the stranger might have headed into the kitchen looking for Tony, which would have given Tony time to escape, but she didn't. Now, by Kant's reasoning, Elvira is responsible for Tony's death because her lie caused it. Had she told the truth, only the murderer would have been responsible for any deaths that might have occurred. Now, she could have refused to answer the stranger altogether or tried to talk him out of it. But the one thing is, she is never permitted to do is violate the moral law, even if others are doing so, even for a really good cause. So the first formulation of the categorical imperative is about the universality of our actions. But the second formulation focuses on how we should treat other people. And here he says that we should act so that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in that of another, always as an end and never as a mere means. And that mere means is to use it only for your own benefit with no thought to the interest or benefit of the thing that you're using. So to say something is a mere means is to use it only for your own benefit, with no thought to the interests or benefits of the thing that you're using. Now, we use things as mere means all the time. I use a mug to hold my coffee. And if it would stop benefiting me, like if it got a crack in it and started leaking, I wouldn't use it anymore. It's perfectly fine to use things as a mere means, but not humans. This is because we are what Kant called ends in ourselves. So we're not mere objects that exist to be used by others. We're our own ends. We're rational and autonomous. We have the ability to set our own goals and work toward them. Coffee mugs exist for coffee drinkers. Humans exist for themselves. So to treat someone as an end in herself means to recognize the humanity of the person you're encountering, to realize that she has goals, values, and interests of her own, and you must morally keep that in mind in your encounters with her. Now, Kant pointed out that we do use people all the time, and that's okay, because most of the time we use other people as a means for something, but not as a mere means. We still recognize their humanity when we use them, and they agree to being used. You know, just any service that you pay for and someone provides that service, they're being a means to that ends, but there's an agreement that, you know, they're a part of that. Just as you're using me right now to get information about Kant, I'm using you as a way to fulfill what I enjoy doing, which is teaching. Kant said that you and I, we all deserve to not be used as mere means because of our autonomy. So unlike other things in the world, we are self-governed. We're able to set our own ends, to make our own free decisions based on our rational wills. All right, let me come back here. To your resource 7.1. Going back to Kant, a primary source for his ethical theory is the Critique of Practical Reason. It is comprised of a critical examination of purely practical reason and establishes the supreme principle of morality. The order of inquiry is from common moral knowledge to the supreme principle, then back to application in practice. So from analysis to synthesis. Okay, going on to the next resource, 7.2. There are 3 theorems of Kantian ethics. So when practical principles presuppose a material object as a determining foundation for the will, they are empirical and as such cannot formulate moral law. And the reason for this is that morality must first be rational and principled. And then the second thing, any practical principle is at the same time to be understood under the general principle of self-love or one's own happiness. Kant has no problem with practical principles, since morality by its very nature must lead to action that is practical. His problem is with common sense principles that are devoid of pure moral principles. And lastly, if a rational being can think of one's maxims as practical universal laws, one can do so only by considering them as principles that contain the determining grounds of the will because of their form and not because of their matter. So for Kant, moral judgments follow a particular form that is first rational, then practical, or first thought and then enacted by way of pure principles. So another source for Kantian ethics is his book, The Fundamental Principles of the Metaphysics of Morals. And he argues in this book that ethics rests solely on the pure part. This is necessary because of the tendency toward corruption. Let me go back here. Let me look here. Now let me go back. All right. Let's go on to resource 7.3. The good will should be understood as rational will. And action is focused from the beginning on the will or motive. The good will's motive is to do its duty for the sake of doing its duty. Whatever it intends, it does so because of its duty. The good will, which is the rational will, acts not merely in accordance with duty, but from duty. Nothing is good without qualification except the good will. It is good not because of its ability to attain, not effect, but in conception, and then importance of pure reason. So a central idea in Kant's work is that the moral worth of action performed from duty lies not in its purpose, but in the maxim, the rule, the principle by which it is determined. So it has nothing to do with the goal or the consequence. It's all imbued, it's all contained in the action itself, not considering the consequences. So the law determines the will objectively. Subjectively, I am determined by respect for the law. This objective element is the maxim of my action, that I ought to follow the law, whatever my inclination may be. So the good will wills as obedient to the moral law. This leads to the conception of duty. Duty consists in observing the categorical imperative. And let me switch back here. Hold on a second. Where did I put these? I think I just kind of talked about these a minute ago. Yeah, categorical imperatives, commands you must follow regardless of your desires. And moral obligations are derived from pure reason. And this goes back to what I said about act only according to that maxim, that rule or principle of action, which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law without contradiction, something that must always be done in similar situations. Hold on here. Okay. So the categorical imperative expresses the form of moral law. All moral principles must partake in universality. He admits that some actions are such that their maxims cannot, without contradiction, be even conceived as a universal law. The categorical means no ifs are relevant to moral reasoning. Kant is not interested in inclination because it is a useless guide. So inclination is a person's natural tendency or urge to act or feel in a particular way. It's a disposition or propensity. And so he he has no interest in that. He believes that's a useless guide. It's got to be, based on reason. So looking at resource 7.4, there are 3 forms of the categorical imperative. First form, act only according to that maxim by which you can at the same time will that it should become universal law. And so we talked about that earlier. And then act so that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or that of another, always as an end and never as a means only. So this is a practical imperative. And the third form, act always as if you were legislating for a universal realm of ends. Now let's go back here again, resource 7.5 to hypothetical and categorical. So hypothetical imperatives are expressed as practically necessary for possible action as contributing to something else. This type of imperative envisions an end. It is an object of practical reason. And then categorical imperatives are expressed as necessary without reference to an end. It is an object of pure reason. So anything that's considering with the end in mind is teleological, and anything it's focused on without looking towards the end of it is categorical. So it would be deontological. And so looking, if you can see my board behind me here, I've got here deontology and teleology. On this is all of this is deontology, and that's teleology. And deontology has to do with duty, and teleology is end or purpose. And so deontology is concerned only with the action itself, its rightness or wrongness, just based on the action alone, whereas teleology looks to the consequence. So it's the consequence determines whether it's a good action. So the hypothetical idea is, if I want to get a good job, the action is go to school, and so that the end, you consider the good end for you, the hypothetical is to get a good job. Well, you need to stay in school. That's the action. And that's the right action based on the goal of getting a job, but that's not necessarily dealing with moral issues according to Kant. The moral is in the action alone. So he falls under here on the deontology. But he determines that, that we can determine that just based on reason. Even, and it has a universal appeal. So Kant values freedom because it is necessary to make judgments, both moral and otherwise, meaningful. He finds in freedom the condition of the possibility of a categorical imperative. Freedom cannot be proven. The conditions of the possibility of a categorical imperative are to be found in the idea of freedom. The idea of freedom is practically necessary. The practical necessity of freedom involves regarding ourselves as a part of the world of sense, natural law, causality, but also the intelligible world and reason. So that's they say that he brings together these two things of these natural laws and also reason. That, there are these, given natural laws, but it's by reason that we understand and apply that. He brings those things together. So here's some things that commend Kantianism, resource 7.6. Kantianism resists being controlled by the situation. Ethics can too easily become reactionary. When ethics become reactionary, the particular situation controls moral reflection. This leads to a situation where the facts of the case can eclipse the principles at stake in the situation. When ethics become reactionary, they allow appropriate compassion to become a lazy and purely emotional sympathy. An example of this would be the process of raising children. While the tears of a child who has been disciplined are painful, this cannot be a sufficient reason for not disciplining a child. Discipline should arise from principles and not from fear of a situation. Kantianism, the next thing is, does not attempt to offer support to cultural mores. Culture is in many ways the form of normal life. Styles of dress, music, movies, literature, television, and so on are effects of culture. All people learn to think in a certain environment and in uncritical ways reflect the specific cultural prejudices of their culture. And this can become a barrier to morality. Kantianism is a reason and critical option for moral reflection because it arises out of reason. Kantianism is not interested in the specifics of culture because morality cannot be located anywhere but in rational principles expressed as universals. So that, lying, I guess, should be wrong, the wrong thing to do in every culture, and so forth. This, from Kantian point of view, it is important to see that these universals are not in any way dependent upon particular historical data. And lastly, Kantianism places responsibility for moral decision-making on the individual. Kantianism requires personal engagement in moral decision-making. Freedom is a crucial concept in Kantianism. Therefore, Kantianism resists the emerging victimology that informs too much moral theory. Accordingly, the Kantianism raises the moral compass above gender, ethnicity, and economic status, which too often serve as excuses. Morality, according to Kant, is something human beings are capable of because we are rational and therefore capable of willing appropriately. Of course, and we'll see how this doesn't really allow, for sinful nature, so to speak, doesn't allow for that aspect, that, it's not that our reason, our reason is hampered by environment, but also by sinful nature. And so there's that spiritual component that he's not acknowledging. So looking at resource 7.7, these are the things that express the limitation of Kantianism. And the first is that Kantianism becomes abstract too easily. The most serious defect of Kantianism is what in some measure commends it. It has been observed that a strength of Kantianism is its ability to resist being reactionary. But Kantianism gives too much up in its tendency toward abstract universality. Morality requires a narrative or a history in order to be understood. For example, the principle of marital fidelity is meaningless apart from a particular history that informs marriage and fidelity. People are not faithful to marriage because they are informed by a universal principle. Rather, people are faithful to marriage vows because of a history that informs the moral rule. Morality is by its very nature the practical and actual embodiment in time of particular virtues. Kantianism clouds this picture by wrapping everything in abstract categories. The next point is Kantianism depends upon reason only. The point to be understood concerns the idea that reason is most useful as a vehicle of the will to embody virtue. No one can credibly argue that morality can survive apart from the engaged intellect. In fact, morality is a type of rationality, but this fact should not eclipse the importance of history, narrative, and even personal experience. In other words, morality always involves resources beyond reason, even if it includes reason. This makes me think, how in the Wesleyan way of seeking truth and applying the truth and so forth, whatever practice that we participate in or so forth, that the foundation is always scripture. That's also informed by tradition and reason and experience. And so, Kant, is like reason only. But I would say as Wesleyans, our resource is also scripture and the tradition of how the scripture has been interpreted for thousands of years, but also, what in our practice, there has to be that we understand it, that there has to be a reason to it, so that it's got to be reasonable to understand from scripture. So Wesley sees that, okay, the Bible, God says in the Bible, be holy as I'm holy. And so what does that mean for, so Wesley's like, well, okay, so what does he mean by be holy? And, if I can't live up to that expectation, or does that mean that I'm perfect, or I can never sin, or what does he mean by that? And so it made sense to Wesley that as he studied the scripture, that sin should properly understood as a willful transgression against the known law of God. So that there are ways that we may fall short in keeping promises and fulfilling expectations and things like that, but that we don't have to willfully disobey and willfully rebel and all these things against God. And that in that way we can be holy as God is holy. So that, for him, that was the application of reason and experience. But it's like his thing was like, if I can't live it out, if I can't live what this is telling me to do, it's not that the scripture's wrong, it's that I don't understand it. I've not understood it properly. And so I need to look back at it and see if I can reasonably understand what is God saying here? What does he mean by this? And how can I live up to this command to be holy as I am holy? So that, that's where we, and we'll see that later, we expand on this idea of morality that goes, it's more than just what we can reason. In that, you know, we can't carry it out without spiritual resources. So then the next thing, the next point is Kantianism is closed to new insight. One particular comment made by Kant regarding his discovery of the philosophy of David Hume is revealing. He said, the writing of Hume awakened me from my dogmatic slumber. While this is often used to show that Kant appreciated some aspects of empiricism, there's also another point is that usually goes unnoticed. Rationalism is dogmatic by nature. William James, an important American philosopher, in his famous essay titled Two Types of Philosophy, he compares empiricism and rationalism in this essay, and one comparison suggests rationalism is more likely to be dogmatic than empiricism. This is not the place for a sustained analysis of James or essay or empiricism versus rationalism. But go ahead.
I'm sorry, could you back up and repeat that? The beginning of that quote?
Where he said, let's see.
It's like two sentences before where you finished.
Right, where he said, the writing of Hume awakened me from my dogmatic slumber.
No, I'm sorry, next.
Okay. Oh, William James?
Yes.
Okay, he compares empiricism and rationalism, and suggests rationalism is more likely to be dogmatic than empiricism.
Okay.
That rationalism is more likely to be dogmatic.
Really? I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, that's what James says.
Okay.
Because let's see, so moral reflection is dependent upon his capacity to learn. That is, to never be finally done. In fact, morality must remain active in the attempt to embody virtue. Therefore, moral reflection is dependent upon new insight in order to proceed. Where with Kant, you know, we shouldn't need new information. It should all, you know, be obtainable just through, you know, reason alone. We don't need more information. All we need is reason. So Kantianism needs to be finished, and this might contribute to a moral absolutism that finally refutes the attainment of a living faith or virtue. And so Alasdair MacIntyre offers this assessment of Kantian ethics. So he says, because it detaches the notion of duty from the notions of ends, purposes, wants, and needs, it suggests that given a proposed course of action, I may also ask whether in doing it, I can consistently will that it shall be universally done, and not ask what ends or purpose it serves. Anyone educated in the Kantian notion of duty will, so far, have been educated into easy conformism with authority. He adds, the consequences of this doctrine in German history, at least, suggests that the attempt to find a moral standpoint completely independent of the social order may be a quest for an illusion, a quest that renders one a more conformist servant of the social order, much more than does the morality of those who recognize the impossibility of a code which does not, to some extent, at least express the wants and needs of men in a particular social circumstance. So it, Kant wants to base morality just, it's not dependent at all on circumstances or social settings or anything like that. That it's the right thing for all time, no matter what. And it doesn't have to do with consequences or anything like that. It doesn't matter what the end or the purpose or anything. It's just always the right thing to do at all times in all places. And there's no need for new information. Now, let's see. I want to see if there's anything else I want to add here. Let's see. Let's see. Here's just a few things on things he says about humanity. And this is the whole idea that humans aren't means to an end, we're the end in themselves. He says that unlike other things in the world, we're self-governed. We're able to set our own ends, to make our own free decisions based on our rational wills. He says we can set goals for ourselves and take steps to realize those goals. And he says this imbues us with an absolute moral worth, which means that we shouldn't be manipulated or manipulate other autonomous agents for our own benefit. And so just, based on reason, he says this means that things like lying and deception are never okay. Because if I'm being deceived, I can't make an autonomous decision about how to act because my decision is based on false information. So for instance, I might agree to loan you money so you can buy books for school, but I wouldn't agree to loan you money so that you can get a new TV. So if you lie to me about what you're going to do with the money you're asking for, you rob me of my ability to autonomously decide to help you. You've treated me as a mere means to accomplish your goals with no thought to my own goals and interests. And that's a violation of Kant's second categorical imperative. So Kant argued that proper rational application of the categorical imperative will lead us to moral truth that is fixed and applicable to all moral agents. And for him, no God is required. But not everyone agreed with him. All right, so the last closing thing is resource 7.8, and this is the ethics of Kant. And that this is with the issue of sexual impulse. And so he suggests that, here's this long list of things that he says about this. Which is, kind of interesting. And he says, first off, human beings have many inclinations, one of which is sexual. The sexual impulse is primarily to enjoy the flesh of another, while human beings can use others for many purposes. It is only in the sexual impulse that another can be made into an object of indulgence. I guess and this is the idea of using someone as an end in themselves. When another is made into an object of indulgence, there is little concern for the general happiness of that person. The sexual impulse can lead to using another for no other reason than the satisfaction of desire. So when a man and a woman come together according to the sexual impulse, they satisfy desire and not human nature. Therefore, it is immoral. Uses of sexuality that are immoral are masturbation, homosexuality, and certain sexual acts between men and women. While the sexual impulse is immoral, it is possible for sexual love to be moral when sexual expression is more than the satisfaction of desire. And so this says here, this argument provides a clear picture of how deontological arguments work. So this, this is taking sex and separating it from any larger purpose, which obviously is, what God put in creation was procreation. There is a greater purpose to it. But this, and it's assuming that it's purely, for only one person's pleasure kind of thing. But it's, but he's basing this argument totally on the reason that using, the reason of using someone for your own personal end, not considering how that affects them. Any thoughts on this? It's interesting to see someone argue all these things based on, without scripture, without God or any, understanding of the God's creation and what, the purpose of men and women, and having, be fruitful and multiply was God's plan, and for the, continuation of humanity to fill the earth. I know this, when I read this, I'm like, oh, this is this could be kind of uncomfortable to talk about.
Yeah, I'm not comfortable talking about it in mixed company, but I do have a question. Given that this isn't, he's not writing this from a like a Christian biblical perspective. It's the third bullet point from the bottom when it says when a man and woman come together according to the sexual impulse, they satisfy desire, which I understand that, but then it says and not human nature. What is human nature defined as?
Let's see, did I come across that? Let me see.
Because, if we start thinking about it from a Christian perspective, we're just saying, whether it's procreation or it was how that human nature would be, how God designed us to interact, but it's not, that wouldn't be his intent. So I'm like, I have no idea what that would have even been implying, but
well, see, under his second formulation, he said, act so that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in that of another, always as an end and never as a mere means, which that means to use only for your own benefit with no thought to the interest or benefit of the thing that you're using. And I mean, you know, we could say that that's in our culture and our world that, I mean, it happens all the time that people are using people as a means for their own satisfaction with no thought to the other person.
So maybe their main human nature would be you actually have a consideration for someone else.
Yeah, that maybe in a lot of cases it's dehumanizing to another person. You know, I thought I saw something here about how he thought of human nature.
While you're looking for that, I'm with Connie on discussing this, but I did have an observation. And you were actually on the same track I was. It seems to me everything that we've read and heard about Kant, it seems to me he's gone out of his way to remove scripture from any of his writings. As a matter of fact, at one point in there, when you were reading from your lecture, I actually thought this guy studied Buddha.
Yeah,
But the only thing it didn't say was karma. It was one place there. So it's like he studied all these different world religions and he went out of his way to remove any aspect of faith, regardless of whose faith, from what he wrote.
yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the case of all these in philosophical ethics. You know, it's trying to understand morality apart from God or spiritual or anything like that.
You know, on this, on at least this one thing, I do appreciate the fact that it's not focused on
I lost you, Connie. You froze up. Uh-oh. Let's see. I guess she'll get back to us. But are you back? Go ahead, Connie, or you're muted. Oh, there you
well, if my internet starts going in and out, I have to get on my phone here in a minute because we have had rain and our internet's been going in and out.
Okay.
No, that this wasn't, even though it was a philosopher, if you want to call it, with his own view, that it's not focused on self-satisfaction and happiness only, but it really is that what's moral is when you treat human beings like human.
Yeah, that's what's good. That's what's good about this.
I'm just going to quit talking because my internet's unstable.
Okay. All right. Okay, well, let me say this. The basic Kantian principle can be stated as follows. Any act, whether sexual or otherwise, is only moral to the extent that it treats the other as an end in itself. Based on this principle, all sexual acts that intend only to satisfy the desire are de facto immoral. This means the only way for the sexual act to be moral is in the context of a human commitment to the other that intends the happiness of the other as its first duty. It does not justify any sexual act within the context of marriage, because not all acts are justified in principle. The Kantian principle denies the morality of homosexual acts, adultery, premarital sex, pornography, and all virtual sexual expression. In light of recent interest in homosexuality, we may want to explore this more fully. It may appear the basic Kantian principle might justify the homosexual act. Accordingly, it might be argued that monogamous homosexual expressions can satisfy the basic criterion of intending the happiness of the other as the first duty. Yet Kant's argument is that homosexual activity violates human nature and therefore can only be an expression of impulse. Which, you know, it's interesting that he would even bring up this activity, you know, based on his, you know, how long ago he said all this in the 1700s. So, well, anyway, we've attempted to define the principles of Kantianism: pure reason, practical reason, duty, goodwill, and categorical imperative. Apply the principles of Kantianism, the ultimate form of deontology. And so that's the left column here only. Understand the limitations of Kantianism, too abstract, depends upon reason only, and closed to new insight. Kantianism is the best example of deontology. This means it makes moral judgments based on universal truth. These truths become a duty for those who intend to act morally. The way of thinking about morality has a natural affinity with the Christian faith. For example, the Ten Commandments are not mere suggestions, and they are true no matter what experience teaches. The Ten Commandments were true during the Exodus, and they are still true in our time. While there are other ways to think of theological ethics, the deontology of Kant is one natural ally. All right, so the homework from this lesson will be to write a 2 to 3 page essay on the Ten Commandments. Express these commandments in the form of universals. Make a journal entry that reflects on interaction with the material of the lesson. And the closing thought is that Paul writes the following words to the church at Philippi. Finally, beloved, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Keep on doing the things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, and the God of peace will be with you. Philippians 4, 8-9. These verses illustrate the manner in which a Christian ethic depends upon the capacity of the true, honorable, just, pure, pleasing, commendable, and excellent to engender the kind of life capable of embodying godliness. Deontology helps one to recognize the relationship between what the mind is fed and what the person does. Paul sees this truth, and it is one we should think about seriously. Okay, moving on to lesson 8, looking at virtue ethics. And so this takes us back historically before Kant to Aristotle. This is the last lesson in this unit. And so this unit has attempted to give an account of some of the major philosophical moral theories. And so we started looking at utilitarianism, which judges morality by its capacity to produce the greatest happiness. And so that it's the end or the purpose that determines if this is the right action. That if this action is good, the end, the purpose, the goal, the consequence of it tells us if it's right or wrong, or moral or immoral. So, and for the utilitarian, it's the greatest happiness, the greatest good. Does this decision provide the majority of people the greatest happiness, which allows that an individual may have to sacrifice that, for the greater good of the community. Then we looked at the natural rights tradition, which looked to fixed and rational rights as the basis for moral reflection. And that would come under deontology, that it's the action alone based on what is the law, natural right. Not based on the consequence. And then, of course, Kantianism, which wraps itself around pure rationality and universal duty. This falls under deontology as well. So the point of this, so along with these, the virtue ethics tradition forms the basic philosophical trajectory for moral reflection of this module. This module will treat theological ethics and Wesleyan holiness ethics. And so while the philosophical portion of this module is essential, the real importance of the module is evident in the theological ethics section. But the point of this lesson is to look what is probably the most adequate of the moral theories is virtue ethics. By the end of this lesson, participants should define virtue ethics, apply virtue ethics, understand the limitations. And let me say this here at the beginning, that I want you to imagine a person who always knows what to say, can diffuse a tense situation, deliver tough news gracefully, be confident without being arrogant, brave but not reckless, generous but never extravagant. This is the type of person that everybody wants to be around and to be like. Someone who seems to have mastered the art of being a person. This may sound like an impossible feat, but Aristotle believed that while rare, these people do exist. And they are what we should aspire to be, which is virtuous. All right, so just to get our feet wet again in this area, here's another scenario. Anne Paris is an experienced youth pastor. In fact, she is the exception as far as youth ministry goes because she has been doing it for 20 years. Her children have grown up and they are raising their own families, but Pastor Ann is still energized by youth ministry. During her time in youth ministry, she has seen the life of teenagers change. Family structures have eroded. Previously settled moral concerns like homosexuality have opened up again. The internet has raised new sexual temptations, and the list goes on and on. Pastor Ann understands that if there was ever a time for a seasoned youth ministers to engage youth, it is now. Recently, Pastor Ann has moved to a new congregation. This particular youth group has always had the chips and dip kind of youth pastor. or fun and games, perhaps. They have spent all their time in activities that invite new people to come, but never discipled those in the youth group to mature in understanding and to grow spiritually. Pastor Ann sees very few virtues among the young people. In fact, the vast majority of the youth think of Pastor Ann as primarily responsible to entertain them. She may be called pastor, but she might as well have a Wendy's cap on and be taking orders for the menu at the next youth event. Pastor Ann wants to begin the process of discipling the youth group so that they will attain some of the virtues of the Christian life. Based on your understanding of the Christian faith and the moral life, how should Pastor Ann begin? This should be more practical.
Relationship building and Bible study. I mean, it's, I think everything starts with building relationships and using that time to begin to discipleship. And I realize I'm mainly talking about one-on-one type activity, but I've gone into new youth groups, and you have to get to know the kids. So you get to know them and you start interjecting, the things that they need to be thinking about and learning about. And you pique their interest. You get them to start thinking beyond the norms that they're used to. That's how I would begin.
Okay.
Let's see if I'm going to turn off my,
Picture?
yeah, can you hear me still better?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, let's see if that'll work. One of the first things would be to spend a lot of time in prayer and interceding for the kids and other leaders. And I do agree with Robert, but I also think it's important to kind of set the table with, if there's other leaders. I don't know how big the youth group is, but let's say there's other leaders involved, and whether those are adult leaders, but also if there's some key youth leaders, whether they're formal or informal, and really set the stage with them in prayer, but also informing and setting expectations, training them of what it really involves to learn and exercise spiritual disciplines and accountability, but not just making it boring. I mean, there's ways to do that in love for a youth group. That it's not going to be something that's going to happen overnight unless the Holy Spirit just comes in and changes the place overnight. And I think that's why prayer is so important. But to not get trapped into continuing because that's what the kids think they want, because that's what they're used to. Anyway, that would be my first level of priority, and then really treat it like it's I'm gonna call it a church where you're doing all the things that help people grow. Whether it's Bible study or worship, that's really worship.
Right.
And fellowship is important and fun, particularly for that age, to build the relationships, but it can't just be fun and games and a social thing. That's not what Jesus did. So much of it is, I don't think people even understand.
Yeah.
That's where I'd start.
That's good. I think another aspect besides the spiritual discipleship and Bible study and fellowship, but getting them involved in service, whether going to homeless shelters or feeding, clothing, where they have to see other people in need and be in a position to try to meet that need, you know, many will realize I'm not equipped for this, or I can't handle it. I need God. I need help. This is overwhelming. But getting them out of their comfort zones and actively ministering, serving others, you know, and like some that were mentioned, like some of y'all mentioned about taking the older ones and getting them to mentor the younger ones. And, you know, I know in our church that we've had the small groups where older teens were leading the same gender in Bible study, you know, maybe with another adult with them. But you know, it does something when they're put in the position of saying the prayer or sharing in the small group, of having, you know, to do part of the lesson and things like that. So yeah, that's all some good things. And you know, this is the idea here, is just talking about the link between how virtue is linked to history, tradition, and friendship association. So going back, looking at Aristotle in Virtue Ethics, resource 8.1, Aristotle is one of the best examples of a virtue ethicist. He is one of the greatest philosophers of the West. He has significantly influenced Christian thought, especially through Thomas Aquinas. He was a student of Plato's, but he charted another course. When he was 17, he went to study at the Platonic Academy. His primary interest was to reaffirm the existence of a public and knowable reality and to answer the question, what is the good life for man? The answer was the reinterpretation and reformulation of the traditional beliefs of the Greeks. He became the tutor to Alexander, son of King Philip of Macedonia, in 342 BC. He set up a school in Athens in 335 BC and called it the Lyceum. Ethics is an important concern for Aristotle's philosophy. Aristotle's ethical theory is a good example of teleological ethics. It is understood as a practical discipline associated with action. He talks about the three kinds of life: enjoyment, statesman, contemplation. The three kinds of life are shaped by three levels of activity. The first is unreflective, and its virtues diminish quickly. That's for under number one, enjoyment. Whatever arises from those acts that reach for enjoyment will soon pass, and they are dependent upon our physical capacity to act toward their achievement. Most people live from one enjoyment to another. This is not a particularly virtuous way to act. And then statesman. The second reflects on action for the other, and it is a more mature way to live. It is both a recognition of the other and the desire to work for others in a more public way. This kind of life begins to exhibit some of the virtues of a moral life. And the third, dealing with contemplation, is the most mature in that it is given to the one activity that will last for a lifetime. Therefore, it is the one activity that can span the entire range of life. It is here that the virtues are understood as activity or habits. Resource 8.2 says that Nicomachean ethics is the best source for understanding Aristotle's ethics. He argues that the first principle of ethics is the conception of the good. One defines the good by the end for which it aims. Aristotle employs reason, balance, and contemplation in order to comprehend moral reflection. All action aims at some good. For example, when I am hungry, I act to satisfy the hunger. If I am in school, it is in order to achieve some better kind of life. This is the telos, the end. If I read, it is to learn, which is some good end. According to Aristotle, it is quite simple. We act towards some good end. This means action reaches beyond itself towards some higher good. The reason grasps the good, but it is the will that acts to embody the good. Therefore, it is essential that the reason and the will are joined if virtue is to result. So for Aristotle, politics is the master science of human good for Aristotle. And that now the polos or politikos is for Aristotle is more than politics. It's all the social aspects of society. Happiness is the first principle of politics. This recognizes the basic role of association friendship in the life of virtue. The nature of happiness for Aristotle is the person who exercises his or her reason and cultivates it, and has it in the best condition. They seem also to be the most beloved of heaven. The wise person is the most beloved, and therefore we may conclude the happiest. Virtue is both intellectual and moral for Aristotle. Intellectual virtue is fostered by teaching, and it demands experience and time. Moral virtue is the outcome of habit. So basically, in terms of virtue ethics, moral principles are discovered by reason, but they're acquired by practice. So we discover them by reason, but they're only acquired by practice. Good habits aim at the good, and bad habits aim at evil. This means virtue is a human excellence achieved by habituated behavior toward the good. Virtue comes to rest in character. Therefore, some refer to virtue ethics as character ethics. So another part of this is moral principles are discovered by reason, acquired by practice in a community of character. So it's the character, it's the community that also shapes the character of the person. Let's see. Let me go here with this. So we're talking about this virtue ethics or virtue theory of Aristotle. This theory, this ethics, does not spend a lot of time telling you what to do. There's no categorical imperative or principle of utility. Instead, virtue ethics or theory is all about character. It's so that so that rather than saying follow these rules so that you can be a good person, Aristotle reasoned that if we can just focus on being good people, the right actions will follow effortlessly. So, focus on being a good person and you will do good things. No rule book needed. So why should you be a virtuous person? So virtue theory reflects the ancient assumption that humans have a fixed nature and essence, and that the way we flourish is by adhering to that nature. Aristotle described this in terms of what he called proper functioning. Everything has a function, and a thing is good to the extent that it fulfills its function, and bad to the extent that it doesn't. This is easy to see in objects created by humans. A function of a knife is to cut, so a dull knife is a bad knife. And a function of a flower is to grow and reproduce, so a flower that doesn't do that is just bad at being a flower. And the same goes for humans. We're animals, so all the stuff that would indicate proper functioning for an animal holds true for us as well. We need to grow and be healthy and fertile. But we're also the rational animal and a social animal. So our function also involves using reason and getting along with our pack. And this kind of sounds somewhat like natural law theory, which came from Aquinas, and we'll talk about him later, I think. But with Aristotle, as with these other philosophers, this isn't about God's plan, it's about nature. He argued that nature has built into us the desire to be virtuous, in the same way that acorns are built with the drive to become oak trees. But what exactly does it mean to be virtuous? And he said that having virtue just means doing the right things at the right time, in the right way, in the right amount, for the right people. And this does, this almost kind of says nothing, and it seems kind of vague. But according to Aristotle, there's no need to be specific, because if you're virtuous, you will know what to do all the time. You know how to handle yourself and how to get along with others. You have good judgment. You can read a room and you know what's right and when. He understood virtue as a set of robust character traits that, once developed, will lead to predictably good behavior. So we see, going on to resource 8.3, Alasdair MacIntyre characterizes habits and practice. He says, according to MacIntyre, a practice is coherent, is complex, is socially established, embodies internal goods, is informed by standards of excellence, enhances the human powers to achieve excellence, provides a pathway toward the extending human excellence. And so with virtue, virtue ethics is dependent upon the habits, practices that engender character. It's all about the individual character. Okay, so, but for Aristotle, it's all about balance. You can the good behavior, you can think of virtue as the midpoint between two extremes, which Aristotle called vices. Virtue is just the right amount, the sweet spot between the extreme of excess and the extreme of deficiency. And the sweet spot is known as the golden mean. So you see here, Virtue exists for Aristotle as a mean between vices, deficits, and excess. In other words, a virtue or a mean is neither too little or too much. The mean is an attempt to mediate between a narrow, un-Greek repudiation of nature and the sophisticate attempt to use nature as the exclusive factor into determining action. So when it comes to facing death, the sweet spot is courage. The going too far to one side is cowardice. Going too far to the other side is foolhardiness. On body actions, you have on one extreme is prolificacy, and the other is insensitivity, and in the middle is temperance. So on the one, on giving money, the mean is liberality. The vice, one extreme is, not using your money well on one, like being too stingy or being too uncareful with how you spend the money, how you give the money. In terms of claiming honors, there's one extreme is vanity, the other extreme is humility, but that gets a little confusing there. Let me just say, let me add this. Let's go back to courage. So if you're walking home from a movie and you see a person being mugged, what is the courageous action for you to take? Your impulse might be to say that a courageous person would run over there and stop the mugging, because courage means putting yourself in harm's way for a good cause. But a virtuous person in the Aristotelian sense would first take stock of the situation. If you size up the mugger and have a good reason to believe that you could safely intervene, then that's probably the courageous choice. But if you assess the situation and recognize that intervention is likely to mean that both of you and the victim will be in danger, the courageous choice is not to intervene, but to call for help instead. According to Aristotle, courage is the midpoint between the extremes of cowardice and recklessness. Cowardice is a deficiency of courage, while recklessness is an excess of courage, and both are bad. Aristotle said that you definitely can have too much of a good thing. So being courageous doesn't mean rushing headlong into danger. A courageous person will assess the situation, they'll know their own abilities, and they'll take action that is right in a particular situation. Part of having courage, he argued, is being able to recognize when, rather than stepping in, you need to find an authority who can handle a situation that's too big for you to tackle alone. Basically, courage is finding the right way to act. And a lot of the time, but not all of the time, that means doing a thing that you know you're capable of, even if doing it scares the pants off of you. He thought all virtue works like this. The right action is always a midpoint between the extremes. There's no all or nothing in this theory, even honesty. In this view, honesty is the perfect midpoint between brutal honesty and failing to say things that need to be said. Like, no one needs to be told that they have a big zit on their face, they already know. The virtue of honesty means knowing what needs to be put out there and what you should keep quiet about. It also means knowing how to deliver hard truths gracefully. how to break bad news gently, or to offer criticism in a way that's constructive rather than soul crushing. The virtue of generosity works the same way. It avoids the obvious vice of stinginess, but also doesn't give too much. It's not generous to give drugs to an addict or to buy a round of drinks for everyone in the bar when you need that money for rent. The just right amount of generosity means giving when you have it to those who need it. It also means realizing when you can't or shouldn't give. So now you can see why his definition of virtue is totally vague, where that golden mean is depends on the situation. But you have to figure out what virtue is in every situation. How can you possibly ever learn to be virtuous? Aristotle thought there was a lot that you could learn from books, but how to be a good person was not one of them. He said virtue is a skill, a way of living, and that's something that can really only be learned through experience. Virtue is a kind of knowledge that he called practical wisdom. You might think of it as a kind of like street smarts. And the thing about street smarts is that you got to learn them on the street. But the good news is you don't have to do it alone. He said your character is developed through habituation. If you do a virtuous thing over and over again, eventually it will become part of your character. But the way you know what the right thing to do is, in the first place, is by finding someone who already knows and emulating them. Those people who already possess virtue are moral exemplars. And according to this theory, we are built with the ability to recognize them and the desire to emulate them. So you learn by watching it and then doing it. In the beginning, it'll be hard and maybe it'll feel fake because you're just copying someone who's better than you at being a good person. But over time, these actions will become an ingrained part of your character. And eventually, it becomes that robust trait that Aristotle was talking about. It'll just manifest every time you need it. That's when you know you have virtue, fully realized. It becomes effortless. So, moving on here under resource 8.4, Aristotle's ethical theory is both teleological and virtue-oriented. It has provided a way to think about character, virtue, good habits, and happiness for generations. Virtue ethics ask a simple question: what kind of person should I be? This character can be envisioned in narratives or in principles, but it comes to rest in persons. Therefore, a virtue is an acquired human excellence. Let's see. Here's some other thoughts here. Looking at the motivation. What is the motivation? What if you have no desire to be the guy who always says the right thing or the lady who always finds the courage when it is needed? Virtue theory says that you should become virtuous because if you are, then you can attain the pinnacle of humanity. And this is comes from he gives the Greek word eudaimonia, and that might mean a life well lived, or it can mean human flourishing. And that a life of eudaimonia is a life of striving. It's a life of pushing yourself to your limit and finding success. an monistic life will be full of the, let me tell you that word is EUDAIMONIA. That's a Greek word. So that life will be full of happiness that comes from achieving something really difficult rather than just having it handed to you. But choosing to live an eudaimonistic monistic life means that you're never done improving. You're never to a point where you can just coast. You're constantly setting new goals and working to develop new muscles. Choosing to live life in this way also means you'll face disappointments and failures. It means the sweet pleasure of sinking into bed at the end of an absolutely exhausting day. It's the satisfaction of knowing you've accomplished a lot and that you've pushed yourself to be the very best person you could be. And this is morality for Aristotle. It's being the best you can personally be, honing your strengths while working on your weaknesses. And for Aristotle, the kind of person who lives like this is the kind of person who will do good things. All right, let's move on here. So here's some things that commend virtue ethics of resource 8.5. Virtue ethics are embodied in tradition, history, and narrative. The very point that has been raised as a limitation for other philosophical moral theories exists as a strength for virtue ethics. The virtues espoused by this theory are rendered more meaningful in the light of the history and narratives that surround it. A simple ideal is just that until it is illuminated. A simple ideal is just that until it is illuminated by a narrative that shows the way. Of course, just any story will not do. Many might tend to think stories are for children, but it does not matter how old we get, stories contextualize life. You might want to conduct a simple experiment the next time you get together with a group of adults. Just listen to the stories told. Some will be told so others will laugh. Others will be for information. Some will be to recall some memory. All of this suggests we locate ourselves in stories. These very stories are the places where values are preserved and rendered meaningful. Virtue ethics understands this and develops it in order to adequately accomplish moral reflection. Next point is virtue ethics appropriately emphasizes character. Ethics is often understood as the science of choice. Quandaries call ethics to action. While there is no doubt ethics is about resolving these so-called conflicts of duty, it cannot be allowed to become merely a moral logic. Virtue ethics understands that whatever else we bring to the table in moral reflection, we bring a person or an agent. No amount of principles or rules will be sufficient if the agent does not bring a mature character to the situation. Whatever else is present, a person's character is crucial. Character results from the embodiment of good habits such that an agent is rendered free. This freedom to act morally is not like learning how to pitch a ball, even though the process is practiced. Freedom is the result of having been shaped by the truth. In other words, good character is the habituated life of a person whose life has been and is shaped by the truth. Virtue ethics understands this aspect of moral reflection, and it represents one of its strengths. Next point, virtue ethics recognizes the importance of a practical rationality. We noted this in the previous lesson that Kant wanted to rescue ethics from the particular situation because he thought only pure reason could guarantee virtue. He finally admits that all ethics is practical. So he introduces the hypothetical imperative and practical reason, but his deepest commitment in ethics is to pure reason. Virtue ethics clearly accentuates reason, but it understands better than any other positions that ethics is a practice of practical rationality. This means even as the stories or the history inform moral reflection, a certain way of thinking can be noted that embodies the way moral decisions are made. From a Christian point of view, we recognize this in light of the way narratives point to truth, to virtue. For example, the stories of the faith have a beginning, middle, and end. The embedded telos of the story embodies a practical logic that points to virtue. Sometimes it's easy to assume that moral reflection is just for the intellectual elite. Yet uneducated people still reflect on moral questions. When these issues arise, people of whatever level of education seek to resolve the situation. When this happens, practical rationality is employed to bring resolution. If only in the sense of mimicking the narrative or history, this rationality is at work. Virtue ethics understands this and uses it with ever more sophistication. This is not to diminish education, rather it is to remind us that all practical rationality is essential to moral reflection, whatever the level of education or sophistication. All right, resource 8.6, the limitations of virtue ethics. The first one is that virtue ethics can become mere traditionalism. One significant challenge for virtue ethics is to maintain a living faith of the dead tradition as opposed to a dead faith of the living traditionalism. Virtues can become frozen within the particulars of tradition and history. And when this happens, virtues become just as meaningless as if they were objects of pure reason. It is not a defense at all to say something is virtuous simply because it has always been done that way. First, nothing has always been done that way. Second, anything that will not submit to the prophetic criticism is already expressing a supreme lack of security. When virtues become more mere traditionalism, they do more to hide virtue than engender it. Therefore, virtue ethics must always be willing to allow its virtues to be in conversation with the people involved in moral reflection. The next point, virtue ethics can become reactionary. The challenge for ethics at the point of mere response is the hot button issue that makes it significant. But virtues cannot be thrown about in order to respond to the latest issue. When virtues become merely reactionary, they lose their meaning, and to a large extent, they lose their importance. The best way to teach a virtue is to teach a history within a tradition. This becomes a language that can interact with the multiple levels of the particular context and still maintain its thread of meaning. Some are tempted to juxtapose moral precision with moral intelligibility, but this is a false alternative. If we are very precise but give no attention to making ourselves understood, the virtue is lost. If we are understood, intelligible, and what we say is incorrect, the virtue is lost. When virtues become merely reactionary, they follow a similar path and the result is the same, the virtue is lost. Therefore, virtues must never become the result of a reactionary attitude to difference or to moral challenges. Rather, virtues must arise out of the essential history, language, tradition, and faith of a people who are intent upon more than telling a story, but are most interested in being the story. The next point is that virtue ethics, because it is teleological, can easily dismiss the labors of historical wisdom. It has already been noted that virtue ethics is linked to history, tradition, and narrative. This is the native hope of virtue ethics, and it is necessarily seeks to embody character in time. That is actual character. But another dimension of virtue ethics is its emphasis on teleology. After all, character is in part the result of the practices and habits informed by virtue, reflected by virtue ethics. The challenge for any virtue ethic is never to allow the labors of historical wisdom to become secondary. All right. So the guided discussion is on friendships. Resource 8.7. And this goes back to the idea of where I said earlier that moral, hold on. I said that moral or virtue ethics, I said that moral principles are discovered by reason, acquired by practice in a community of character. So, and that's why Aristotle thought certain virtues could not be achieved without forming associations. One such association is the making of friends. Having friends is important for several reasons. First, friends offer us objective knowledge of ourselves. They can actually function much like a mirror in our life. Second, friends protect us from boredom by calling us toward things we might not otherwise consider. Friends open us to a larger world than we might otherwise be able to see. Third, friends call us to live more than a private life. Friends encourage us to be public persons, that is, to reach outward. Fourth, it is likely that without friends, we will not achieve the virtue necessary to a healthy character. This means friends free us to be good by joining us in that endeavor. When you think about people that have committed terrible crimes, mass murders, and all this stuff, you know, they were loners. They were isolated. You know, they didn't have friends, and they didn't have people to, you know, encourage them to reflect to them how they were coming across, and you know, they didn't see any value in their life. You know, that people without friends don't think they are valued. There's any value to their life. So the bond in character friendship is a love of virtue, but that this is no impersonal abstract good. Rather, it is an embodied good, a good friendship taken to heart and enfleshed in the life of another. What are the ways in which friendship is linked to the attainment of Christian life? And that's where you can respond. Besides, I'm tired of hearing myself talk. Let me ask that. What are the ways in which friendship is linked to the attainment of Christian life? You can think of this theologically or practically.
I know, let me turn it on. I have some really close friends that we've actually been prayer partners for over 20 years. And their friendship, just from a perspective, kind of, they keep me grounded in that they love me enough to challenge and hold me accountable if I am either thinking about something wrong, or the other perspective is to challenge me to go deeper or to reach further than I would. So it's like both sides, to protect against going down the wrong path, but also to encourage to step into greater things.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'm right there with Connie. I have that same thing, and I think that's critical. What, I'll be honest with you, what was throwing me was the attainment. That would, because when I think of attainment, I go straight to salvation, not growth in a Christian life. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So based on what Connie said, I'm in full harmony with that. We have to have good Christian friendships to help us in every aspect of our journey in faith.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about, don't majority of people come to faith in Christ through a person? There's rare instances of people that on their own, but we come to Christ through other people, but we also grow in Christ because of other people, because somebody took an interest in us. They shared the gospel with us, and then they guided us. They took time for us. And and when you think about it, you think about God's nature, that God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and therefore, within the Godhead is a community. And so, and community is all about relationship. We understand that God is relational. God was relational before we were created. There was a society, there was a social, there was a relationship within God before we were created. And in being created in God's image, that means we were made for relationship. We were made to be social, to God and to each other. And so it's like within God's nature, speaking theologically, and that we reflect that. And God, it's carried forward not only in how God created us, but the way God kept interacting and making covenant, and laying out guidelines for not just how to interact with God, but how to interact with each other. Saying, both positively and negatively, that what is the loving, we should always do the loving thing, and then spelled out the unloving thing to do is to steal from each other, to kill each other, to covet what each other has, and all those things. So he was concerned, God was concerned to give guidelines for our interaction with each other. But there, but especially, we get into the New Testament, and we see how Jesus, formed the disciples around him, and we hear all the things that he said about love one another, bear each other's burdens, and then the other passages talk about confess sins to each other, pray for each other, all these things that you may be healed. And, but it's in that community of character that a person develops character, that develops the virtues, that I don't know of anyone that can really grow without accountability, that doesn't make themselves accountable to someone else, that doesn't say, these are my goals, would you hold me accountable? I'm going to call you weekly to tell you how I'm doing. And you're free to call me anytime you want and ask how I'm doing. But without that, we struggle. We struggle without community and accountability and support and encouragement. If you, any goal to develop virtue, it just doesn't happen in a vacuum. So, but it's, I think to, take this a step further, it's like in the Christian life, we have friends, people that we're all at kind of the same level in our virtue, but we should seek to have relationship with those that are further along than we are, but also have relationship with those that are not as far along as we are. So we're going to kind of stay the same if everyone around us is all at the same level or less than. But if there's someone that's inspiring us to go further, and then we're inspiring others to come further, we need to have the relationships that aren't just comfortable, but that challenge us, that push us. All right, so we have attempted to define virtue ethics, which includes narratives, practical rationality, and habits. We've attempted to apply virtue ethics. This theory can be either, but its most practice forms are teleological. We try to understand the limitations of virtue ethics, how it can become mere traditionalism, that it can be reactionary, and can dismiss the labors of historical wisdom. This lesson has also linked an active, engaged life and friendship to virtue ethics. The next lesson will begin Unit 3 of this module. This unit will characterize some of the major themes of persons who reflected on morality from the Christian point of view. You should also note that special care will be given to Wesleyan holiness ethical reflection in Unit 4. And the next lesson will deal specifically with patristic ethics, that is, the ethics of the early church. The homework for this one is to write a 2 to 3 page essay on a suggested curriculum of virtues for a specific age group. This should just be a full outline at this point. And then read and respond to resource 8.8, which should, like we said before, just involve taking some notes, writing a little handwritten response to this, not writing a full paper, but just jotting down a paragraph of response to what you read. And that can correspond to making a journal entry that reflects your engagement with the material of this lesson. And lastly, some scriptures here. Proverbs 22:1 says, "A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and favor is better than silver or gold." Proverbs 21:16 says, "Whoever wanders from the way of understanding will rest in the assembly of the dead." And Proverbs 19:20 says, "Listen to advice and accept instruction that you may gain wisdom for the future." These are just 3 proverbs found in the book of Proverbs. Yet, as they reflect the practical wisdom of life, they depend upon something much bigger and more important. These proverbs depend upon a particular history. Because of that, they praise a good name, understanding, and the willingness to listen. These proverbs suggest that virtue is really about the kind of character capable of freedom. The other side of this is that the virtue frees us to live ethical lives. The writer of the Proverbs is correct when he says, "An intelligent mind acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge." Okay. I was wanting to check again on, so their next lesson is December 15th. I was concerned about, would it be difficult to meet on the 22nd, which is 3 days before Christmas. It's right in the middle. It's Christmas week, and those of you like Lucas and Carlos is not here tonight, but with young children and families, didn't know if you could just let me know if you think the 22nd you still want to meet then, or if you need a break to catch up. I'm also open to that. I kind of allowed a week off just in case, it'll take us to the last week of January to finish the instruction. Connie, did you?
Yeah, I am going to sign up for a class with Awakening School of Ministry, and it starts on the 19th. So it's going to be on Thursday nights also.
Oh,
So if we keep pushing this class, if we push this class very far out,
yeah.
And it's one of those, it's a history class that I haven't taken any of, and so I'm going to have to take that. And I only have like 3 classes left, so I don't want to wait till that one comes back around.
Okay.
So I just want to let you know that for sure I'll be out on the 19th, but if we do start pushing, but I don't want Christmas break to be anybody who needs off that on the 22nd, don't do it. I'll take the vote of whatever else the bigger group decides on that, because it doesn't, I'll just work through how I need to miss this class.
Okay.
For the record, I'm good whether we meet or we don't. And I'm kind of like Connie, I'm on board with what everybody else needs to do. I will say this though, I have surgery on my schnoz next Wednesday. So depending on, I've got a basal cell on the tip of my nose. So depending on how that goes, y'all may only get my picture for the next couple of weeks. It's one of those deals. They don't know how deep it is. So I don't know to what extent that's going to be. Anyway, I'm just want to give everybody the heads up. Not that I'm all that pretty to look at to begin with, but y'all don't want to see. Y'all don't want to see mess. So
Well, we'll be praying that it goes well for you.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And okay, well, any thoughts you have, Lucas? Are you good for the 22nd, or what do you feel like?
I mean, like for now, I'm gonna have family that coming from Brazil. My in-laws actually, like they're coming next week. They're gonna leave on January the 9th, I think. So they're gonna spend with us like Christmas and New Year's.
Okay,
So they're gonna be here by then, but I mean, I let you guys know. Yeah, but I
okay,
mean, for now, for me, it's okay to have the class on the 22nd. But in case something changes, like they wanna do something because they're gonna be
Right.
here,
right.
you guys know.
Okay, are you, or what day are they coming in? You said
Oh,
next week?
they're coming next Friday.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, but they're gonna stay here until like the beginning of January.
Okay,
Yeah,
well, we have another week to talk about it,
yeah,
if we can still meet.
right,
For sure, we'll definitely meet next Thursday.
sure.
And we'll look at the next two lessons, so.
Yeah.
All right, any questions? I'll try to send you some more things to read on Kantianism and virtue, or Aristotle, Kant and Aristotle, like I did on the things I just sent, the reading I sent this past week. So just to give you a little more something to maybe help you make better sense of what we're talking about. So
That would be helpful.
yeah, one thing I recommend is
Yeah.
on YouTube you can look up videos on utilitarianism, natural rights. all
I
these-
did that. I'm
Did you?
sorry. I did that because I was trying to find something like
Yeah.
easier to understand the concept, and
Yeah.
I did for the previous lesson,
Okay,
and it helped me like to understand like better.
Yeah.
So I did that. I'm for sure I'm gonna do the same thing for this one, like to
Yeah.
better understand, grasp the meaning.
well, these videos have nice graphics and
That's right. Yeah,
visual. I can't recreate those, but
right.
yeah, that'll be good.
Awesome.
Yeah, there is other resources out there if you need help.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, well, y'all have a good evening, good weekend, and
Thank
we'll be Connie and I will both be in the Christmas drive-through at our nativity at our church Friday night and Saturday night,
Wow.
and it goes from like 6:30 to 9.
Okay.
So if you want something to do with your kids or anyone, just come on up
Is
or
it,
come on down.
remind me, is it Crossroads, or I forgot what y'all changed the name to?
Generations,
Generations, that's right. Okay.
formerly Fort Worth First.
Yeah, okay.
They're in
Cool.
Crowd.
We might have to drive up and see that Saturday.
Yeah, I'll be in the second scene. I'm Isaiah, but I won't be on until like 8:10.
Oh, okay.
There's
Cool.
three different ones of us that are doing it, and we take turns. So I'll be like in the last part, from 8:10 to 9.
Cool.
Yeah, but all right. Well, good night.
Thank you, brother.
Good
Thank
week.
you, everybody.
God
Good
bless.
night.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you.